we all also have these ideas in our head about the way our life is going to look, the way our life is supposed to look. So the question for me was, what happens when that doesn't happen? So the name immediately kind of gives that sort of feeling. I was supposed to have a baby. I think everyone has this idea, as I said, about I'm going to have 3 children, 7 children. I'm going to have them exactly at this time after I finish school, before I get too old. I'm going to have them 2 years apart or 4 years apart. I also was supposed to have a baby. In fact, I was supposed to have 6 babies. And so the name for me is personally meaningful. And also, I wanted people, as I said, immediately to connect to it.
This is Women's Gallery, the podcast where we showcase women defining Jewish leadership today. My name's Joanne Greenaway, and each episode I interview one incredible female leader making a mark in her own way on the Jewish community, exploring different models of leadership in the context of schools, shuls, universities, Batei Din, and much more. Women's Gallery is an LSJS podcast powered by the Walder Foundation and a generous anonymous supporter. This last week has been a very difficult week for Jews in the UK specifically. I've certainly felt a huge outpouring of love and concern from friends and colleagues and family in Israel and further afield, which is remarkable and very, very special and heartwarming. But in the UK, after the stabbing in Golders Green, and that being on the back of a number of attempted and successful anti-Semitic attacks, many of us feel that a corner has been turned where we can no longer explain these things away, minimize them. And I, for one, amongst many Jewish community colleagues, have spent the last week really thinking about and talking about what should be done, what even can be done, what is too late to be done, and the multifactorial nature of this problem and the anti-Semitism having seeped into so many parts of a society and coming both from overseas actors as well as from the left and from the right and from terrorists, and it feels very overwhelming. It's something that we're all grappling with, and I know we'll be grappling with for some time, and I wanted to acknowledge that on this podcast as not our main focus, at least not for today, possibly going forward with conversations, but it's very much there as a backdrop to the conversations we're having. I certainly feel that our response has to be one of Jewish pride, and that I certainly insist on living a full Jewish life and continuing to lean into education as part of the future, both within our community and beyond. But I also want to acknowledge that for the first time, I have felt twice about going into central London with a scarf as a Jewish head covering, and for my boys as well with kippot. It should be acknowledged that this is what's taking place at the moment in the UK. At the same time, in very different news, but relevant to those of us who follow issues of women's Jewish and Torah and halachic leadership, specifically in Israel, we had the 3 women who took rabbinical exams after a long fight through the courts to be allowed to take them. It was not without its own trouble in that they had to wait for the exam papers many hours. They had to suffer a number of different types of indignity, but they managed to take those exams, which is a huge achievement and a cause for celebration. And very differently, we have a wonderful guest on today's podcast, Dr. Aimee Baron, and I'm very, very happy to welcome her to Women's Gallery. She is the founder and executive director of I Was Supposed to Have a Baby. The organization's mission is to transform how the Jewish community cares for people struggling with fertility and loss by providing mental health support, educational resources, and a warm, nurturing space through digital platforms, communal convenings, and connections to wider support networks. Dr. Baron is really a global voice on these issues in the Jewish world, and she was formerly the Director of Innovation and Growth at Nechama Comfort. She's also worked as an attending pediatrician at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital before taking a leave of absence after her 3rd miscarriage. She lives in the greater New York area with her husband and children, and I've been wanting to talk to Aimee for a really long time, so I am really delighted to have you with me on Women's Gallery. Although I am conscious that it's a difficult subject, it may well be very difficult for some of our listeners. Nevertheless, important to be having this important conversation. Welcome, Dr. Baron.
I am honored to be here. We've tried to schedule this for a while now, and it was my fault, my
We got there in
schedule.
the end. We
So,
got there in
so
the end.
I apologize, but I am really thrilled to be speaking to you and really to your audience today.
So let's start by digging a little bit into this organization that you've established. It's called I Was Supposed to Have a Baby. It is a very direct title, heartbreaking, if I may say. And I wonder how it was that you chose that title as really your focus.
You know, having been through infertility and lots of pregnancy losses myself, when I was going through all of this, there were all these different organizations that existed and still exist, who I work with all the time, who have incredible missions, but their names are kind of hard to understand. A Time, B'nai Olam, Pua, I understand them, but the name itself doesn't necessarily immediately tell you what it's about.
In the UK, we have Hannah, who I know you've done work with, who are obviously named after Hannah and Tanakh, and they do incredible work in this area as well. But unless you're well-versed in Tanakh, you wouldn't necessarily connect.
Correct. So that's exactly it. I wanted a name in English, not in Hebrew, first of all, because I wanted it to be accessible to people all over the world who didn't necessarily have, a real command of the Hebrew language. And I wanted people to immediately understand just by the name what the organization was. And I wanted it to pull those heartstrings. So, I was running around different ideas, and the reality is that there's this concept in Judaism that we talk about, things that happen to us are supposed to happen, that Hashem has this grand plan. And we all also have these ideas in our head about the way our life is going to look, the way our life is supposed to look. So the question for me was, what happens when that doesn't happen? So the name immediately kind of gives that sort of feeling. I was supposed to have a baby. I think, everyone has this idea, as I said, about, I'm going to have 3 children, 7 children. I'm going to have them exactly at this time after I finish school, before I get too old. I'm going to have them 2 years apart or 4 years apart. I also was supposed to have a baby. In fact, I was supposed to have 6 babies. And so the name for me is personally meaningful. And also I wanted people, as I said, immediately to connect to it.
Yeah. To me, it sounds, when I hear you describe it that way, that people will immediately feel more heard and understood because they're identifying with that sentiment that is what it says on the tin. So in terms of the organization that you set up, you're a consulting pediatrician, you're working in the medical space, and you obviously identified a gap, or you felt personally that when you were going through miscarriage, loss, perhaps there wasn't anything there, or there was something missing that you needed. So I'd love you to explain more directly, what was this gap you were trying to fill? What didn't exist that you felt you needed to set up something new amongst all these other different charities in this fertility space?
Absolutely. I personally took advantage and used all of the organizations that I mentioned above, and they are absolutely incredible at what they do, providing financial assistance, providing halachic guidance, providing medical assistance. And many of them also offered emotional support. At that time, to be clear, we're talking about between 15 and 18 years ago. So it was a long time ago. The world has really changed since then. But at that time, the emotional support really was limited. And so, number one, I kept thinking, I really wanted a space where people could come who were struggling with just the emotional aspect of this. Exactly as I said before, their families didn't look like the way they thought they were going to look. How to handle all the difficulties of going through a Jewish calendar, of the different chagim, of brises, of weddings, of bar mitzvahs, of all the different kinds of spaces and times where we as communities and also as families gather. And when your family doesn't look like what you hoped it was going to be, then how difficult that is. So I wanted a space not only to deal with the emotional aspects of trying to have a child and then possibly failing, dealing with losses, etc., but I also wanted a uniquely Jewish space to process those pieces emotionally. And that really didn't exist. But the other piece that was also deeply important to me, and this goes back to the idea that I wanted it to be English, the name to be English as opposed to Hebrew, was most of these organizations were specifically geared to the Frum community, to the Orthodox community. I am modern Orthodox, but I did not grow up Frum. And while there are many people who really like aren't interested in a Jewish space to process once they're trying to have a family or failing at having a family, frankly, a lot of people do, even if they're not integrally involved in Jewish life on a daily basis in the way that Frum Jews are. And there was really no space for them. And so I wanted a space that everyone could feel comfortable coming in and having that emotional holding. And so the idea that anyone could access it, number one, the idea that it was emotional support, number two, and number three, the organization started in 2019, so pre-COVID. But what I saw at that point was really the emergence of social media in being a holding space for people, especially who are going through fertility challenges, but all kinds of difficult struggles. And the power of being able, as much as there are obviously pockets in the Jewish community and frankly in the Frum community that really shun social media and smartphones. But the reality is that having the ability to get support in the palm of your hand, regardless of where you are, is incredibly powerful. And especially for people in the fertility community, and I'm using anyone who's dealing with loss, people who are trying to have children, people who are failed, people who are single and considering egg freezing or not, even people who are dealing with surrogacy, adoption, and so many more different kinds of stories, let's call it. The reality is that many times these experiences that people having are deeply private and they're not ready to share it, sometimes even with their close friends and family, let alone getting up after work or on a weekend and going in person to be in a support group. It's hard enough to deal with all of the emotions and all of the practical pieces when people are struggling. So I thought a magic potion, so to speak, would be bringing that support directly into people's hands.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I wanted to utilize social media. And then later we've used other virtual platforms to be able to deliver that support to people at 3 o'clock in the morning, whether they were in a big city with a big infrastructure in terms of Jewish community or a small town where they were the only Jew and they really wanted to connect Jewishly in terms of this
Wow.
arena. So social media, I maintain, although many people disagree with me, I maintain can be used for the good.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to unpack there. And I really want to dig more into this, the concept of using social media in this area, and also some of the things that you've spoken about the specific Jewish community aspects that I feel like there's so much nuance there that you're very sensitive to in the way that you work. But I think firstly, I want to understand your journey because you've moved from being a medical doctor in pediatrics, right, into this world, and you've left behind a medical career. And I think both from the perspective of women's Jewish leadership and people's journeys, and also very personally having myself left the world of being a lawyer to working also in the charity space, more in education and women's rights, etc. That's a big shift. It's a big transition. And clearly, this is something that affected you personally and something you decided to pivot towards. And I heard you talk about people who experience loss as feeling like they're failing. You said, failing to have a family. So I wonder if you could explain a little bit about, like, personally, what was it that really kind of triggered this departure from this very well-trained and well-established profession that you had to taking such a radical step?
Look, Joanne, to be clear, I love medicine. I still love medicine and I loved my job. I loved taking care of children. I loved taking care of babies. The problem was emotionally that even though at that point, when I started having the bulk of my losses, I was working as a pediatrician in the newborn nursery, the neonatal intensive care unit, and on the labor and delivery wards. I don't know if they're exactly called the same in England, but basically, I was the pediatrician in the delivery room checking the babies as literally they emerged in the world. And then, once they were settled into the nursery, checking them to making sure they're okay. And if, God forbid, there was a problem, sending them off to the intensive care unit. When, I mean, I think this speaks to anyone who is struggling. Sometimes people say, you know, listen, I know you're going through a hard time, but just do something to distract you. Go to work. At work, you'll deal with all kinds of other things. And like when you go to work, you'll be distracted. Then when you come home, like you'll have that time to process. Well, obviously for me, going to work wasn't a distraction. Going to work just made it all come right to the surface. And frankly, I found it really difficult to perform my job in the way that it needed to be performed without like needing to sneak off and cry in a closet hysterically most days. It became impossible. And especially, no judgment value on how people become parents and when they become parents, but as a person who was deeply emotional and like those emotions, as I said, were really, right beneath the surface. When I see the 14-year-old coming in with her third baby, it made me just think like God, like what is going on here? Like there is something like with the order of the world, like do some people deserve to have babies and some people don't deserve to have babies? Like that's not my decision. But when I just felt like things were totally upside down and I was desperate to have a child. And then people who really didn't seem to care much about the fact that they were bringing life into the world were having children.
Mhm.
It became too much.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I left my job.
Yeah. You had 3 miscarriages in a row, and then you went on to have a child afterwards. Is that right?
So my full story, I share bits and pieces of it at different points. My full story is that I got married when I was 27, and thank God we had our first child right away. But then when we were trying to have our second, I had 3.5 years of what we call secondary infertility, meaning that you already have one child, or maybe even you have multiple children, but you can't get pregnant again for whatever reason. So in that period of time, as we were trying and trying and trying, I had one early loss, one early miscarriage. And then thankfully, after a bunch of doctor appointments and treatments, everything sort of up to IVF. Thankfully, we conceived and I had my second. And from that moment on, thankfully, infertility just completely went away. It was just unexplained when it started and unexplained why it never happens again. So we had my second. Thank God we had my third. And I was working as a pediatrician during all this time. And then after my third, I had 4 second trimester losses in a row with no medical explanation. All of these babies were healthy. I lost 2 boys and 2 girls. And it was after that second loss that I quit my job. I was just, I can't keep doing this anymore.
It's heartbreaking. And I'm sure that everybody will more than understand how impossible it would be to work in that environment. But neither did you escape from it. You went on to set up a charity in this world. So there's also something very personal about the work that you're doing. And I can understand the sense of mission. But is there something difficult about working in this space in the sense that, you bring your whole emotional self to it all the time and, you can't have any boundaries, or how does that feel?
Look, I think that for people who have an unhappy ending, whose stories end in despair or in loss or that are unresolved, I don't know, frankly, how they do work like this. Honestly, like I really don't. For me, the end of my story is that after all of those losses, I was completely broken, as you can imagine, emotionally, physically. I was really just a shell of myself. And we stopped. Like I just said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. We're not, thank God we have 3 kids. I'm finished. I just going to try to focus on the children that I have and try to just deal with the grief of the unresolved. And after about a year or two, the timing is kind of fuzzy in my head, but we decided to give it one last try. Um, Lots of doctors we had seen and who had some thoughts that I wasn't 100% comfortable with in terms of their treatment plans initially. And I just felt like, I need to do all the Hishtadlus, all of it. And at the end of the day, Hashem is in charge. And but I just need to know I didn't leave anything on the table. So thankfully, we got pregnant again. And getting pregnant, not my problem anymore, as I told you. And we got to that first ultrasound where you see the heartbeat around 7 weeks. And there were two heartbeats. And with my trauma speaking, I turned to my husband and said, "Oh, look, two heartbeats. That will be two babies that die now instead of one," because that's what trauma does. It's trauma talking. Um, but those two babies are my twins, and they are alive and delicious and incredible. And I think it is really only because I was able to have them with really no idea as to why that pregnancy worked and why the others didn't. But because I had my quote unquote happy ending. So for me, doing this work and starting this charity, really, it's not my story anymore, in that I'm not emotionally invested in the same way that I would be if the story was
Right.
unresolved.
And I didn't mean to ask it in a negative way. I really very much meant it in that I think that by doing this, you really bring something important through your lived experience that helps you to understand what women need. And you've identified something that I'm sure is able to support so many people. And I'm really interested in the whole aspect of support within the Jewish community. You spoke about how there was nothing that really crossed the whole spectrum and that you were able to kind of bridge different divides, having not grown up frum. And I think that there is something particularly special in the frum community, like in the more Haredi communities, there is incredible provision, as I understand it, and that people often like to get support within their own very specific cultural environment. So I think what you've done is particularly interesting in that you're able to cross a broader spectrum. I wonder if that has its own challenges. Like, do you feel that you're able to bring enough cultural sensitivity to people where they are in their own personal space, even across such a wide spectrum from presumably non-observant to Hasidic even? Is that something that you can cope with as one organization?
I always find it's interesting when I get asked this question, because for me, and when I was starting, I was supposed to have a baby. I was only interested in emotionally supporting people. Still am, but we've now taken it to some other spaces. But the core of the work that we do is about holding people in pain. And so it really doesn't matter whether you keep Shabbos or whether you don't keep Shabbos, whether your partner is someone who is of the opposite gender or the same gender. And I may be speaking in heresy here, but frankly, when people ask me who are our halachic authorities, I say, no one. Do I need a Rav to give us a psak and tell me that I'm allowed to hold someone's pain? I don't. And the people that I speak to personally tell me that I don't. And so, because we're dealing with the core of people's experiences of trying to hold them in a moment in their lives when they're trying to build their families, they're thinking about Jewish continuity. They're feeling isolated from other people around them, sometimes in their own families, sometimes in the community at large. Everyone else seems to be having an easy time of it, and they're not. And so, yes, do I have people who say to us, "Oh, I'm not interested in working with you as an organization because you support people over here." And then I have other people who say, "Oh, I'm not interested in getting support from you because I see that you support people over here." And the reality is I think it's absolutely beautiful and vital and important that we have lots of different kinds of Jewish organizations that support all different kinds of people and all different kinds of circumstances. That's incredible. I'm trying to do the umbrella. I'm trying to really hold people regardless of what they believe or who they follow. And the reality is that people from all swaths of the Jewish community come and find us, and they sit in support groups with people who are completely different from them. And they sit in my trainings, and they come to our Shabbos programs, and they come to our webinars because they're in pain and because we do a uniquely powerful job of holding them.
Yeah. Look, in and of itself, if you're able to bridge divides and bring people together, then you're also performing another important function. I was just wondering about some of the halachic issues because they're issues that I've personally taught and looked into and I'm interested in when it comes to things like issues around surrogacy, IVF, sometimes needing to go through conversion processes to understand who the mother is, who the father is, etc. And sometimes those issues can bring an additional level of stress to women who are already in very emotionally fraught situations. So I think those issues sometimes can need pastoral support on a religious level, and perhaps a Rav or a woman who understands those halakhic issues may want to get involved. And maybe that's another angle that kind of intersects with your work. But I think, it's a positive thing that you don't necessarily need to involve a kind of rabbinic panel on the areas of work that you're doing. It's just a kind of related area.
Absolutely. I think, to go one step further, I want to be clear. I run a WhatsApp group with the heads of all the major Jewish fertility organizations in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We are constantly passing resources back and forth. I need a Rav who will help me with this in this country or this city.
Right.
I need a therapist in this city. I need a doctor in this city. I need support for someone who's going through this. So we all work together to make sure that people are getting what they need. In addition to that, what's interesting is because I sit in a space that is sort of on the side of halacha, and really it's about the emotional support. When someone comes to me and says, our Rav said to us that we can't use donor sperm. My husband doesn't have any sperm and we can't use donor sperm. And the only option for us to have a child is through adoption. And I say, wonderful. Then it's my job to hold you. Great. Here are the resources in regard to adoption. And I want you to know that halacha, this is what your Rav told you, but there are organizations that specifically sit as experts between halacha and fertility. And there are other post-game that are out there that are incredibly well respected that do say that donor sperm is absolutely allowed. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you who to listen to and to ask 15 shilas of 15 different people to come to the answer that you're looking for. What I'm telling you is, please go after the knowledge. Here are people to speak to and just inform yourself. Know what's out there. Here, speak to this organization, speak to this person, and then you decide with your own Rav what the right path is for you. I want you to know that what you think is black and white is not necessarily black and white, but whatever you decide, I am here to hold you, and we as an organization are here to hold you. And I am so proud to say that there are many, many, many Jewish children that have been brought into the world because of those kinds of conversations.
Baruch Hashem, that's really amazing. I actually think that that function that you're fulfilling is super important, where you're able to have that level of knowledge that you can draw on and be that reference point between different services and to be able to shed light on best practice, which really makes me think of the work that I'm trying to do with Get Refusal, trying to write a book that brings together best practice around the world, because people really do only know what they're told about in their localized area. And if you don't have access to that knowledge is power, to know what the options are, then you can be really limiting yourself. So Yeah, I mean, how much more so as well in this area where you're bringing life into the world. It's incredible. And it's incredible that you have this network internationally. I think that in itself is, I guess, over the last few years where we've become so much more interconnected, we're able to draw upon each other. I'm sure that has totally changed the whole field.
Look, without question, I mean, I really saw, having worked at Nahama Comfort and like getting knowledge of other organizations as I was working there, I saw that so much of the work is interconnected. We're supporting so many of the same people, but also we're also supporting lots of different people who really don't have an idea as to what exists. And so through I was supposed to have a baby, I made it our job, our mission to really understand deeply what all of the other organizations actually do, so that when people come in and say, I need this, or I need that, or I need this, then I can say to them, okay, go here for this, go here for that. And then at the end of the day, they're going to come back to us because they're going to need substantive emotional support. And so they're going to come find us eventually. Like people sometimes say, oh, like you're giving your donors to other people. Like, don't you want to keep them? I'm like, this is not about like trying to keep my donors. This is about making sure that people get the help that they need.
So when it comes to that emotional help, do you see that there are particular issues that women within the Jewish community have? Are there particular, perhaps, stigmas attached to shame attached to infertility in a community that focuses so much on family life? Is that something that you've kind of experienced or seen change over the years?
Absolutely. There is so much emphasis on family. There is so much emphasis on children in the Jewish community at large, not only just in the Frum community, that when your life and or your family size doesn't look like whatever the norm is, then people immediately feel that they just don't belong. They're constantly getting asked the question of, so new, when are you getting married? So new, when are you having another one? Oh, your child isn't getting any younger. Oh, so what's happening? And like the work that we do is not only about supporting the individual or the family that is struggling, but it's also about doing a lot of the education around this isolation and the stigma that people feel when people are constantly barraging them with these questions and these like, inserting themselves into people's personal lives and like the Amir Tashems by you and all of that. It just really makes people feel othered. And so much of the work that we do is speaking to communities and going into and speaking to college teachers and mikveh attendants and workplaces and so on, and really saying to people, look, if you're in your teacher's lounge and everybody is talking about their babies and everybody is talking about being pregnant, and when you have people in that lounge who are single or haven't had children, or maybe there are people that are struggling that you know nothing about, but if the conversation constantly revolves only around those topics, you're immediately alienating people. And so just even opening people's eyes to the fact that this exists in the world around them, frankly, everywhere, is sometimes just totally earth-shattering. Like they really don't know. I mean, I'll just throw a couple statistics out there for people who don't realize. 1 in 6 couples are dealing with some kind of infertility, and 1 in 4 pregnancies, not 1 in 4 people, but 1 in 4 pregnancies end in a loss. And so what that means, if you just like for 1 second think about it, is that if this hasn't happened to you, then it's probably happening to the person who's sitting right next to you, or your friend, or your sister, or your neighbor, or your cousin. And so I don't think it's a stretch when I say that this is literally everywhere. It's in all of our families, it's in all of our communities. And the adjustment that people can make is tiny. It's not like we're asking people to never talk about their pregnancies again and to never show pictures of their kids. But what we're saying is just be aware as you're having these conversations that there are probably people around you who are going through this, and just try not to make it all of your conversations,
Yeah.
or
And
try
people
not to
make
have those
assumptions.
really, yeah,
I
yeah,
think
exactly.
I'm just thinking about my own journey and looking back. Thank God I have 4 children and they're not so far apart. But at the time, I struggled to get pregnant with each of them, and nobody would know, and you can be around these conversations where people make assumptions and assume everything's great and everything's moving forward, and it's not. And those years are really, really hard. It sounds very obvious when you say it, and the way that you phrased those questions, like, new and, it's about time, like it sounds totally awful, and as if, how could anybody possibly think that that was a good thing to say? But I'm sure you're right, and that it is everywhere. And I'm wondering if you have advice for things that on the other side people could say that could be comforting or could be helpful, or are you suggesting that one should just avoid talking about anything personal?
Right. So I'm not saying that at all, because that's just, it's not natural. It's not the way we exist as humans, right? Like, someone once said to me, I'm inviting over for Shabbos my single friend and my other friend who doesn't have children. And so I'm thinking about taking all the pictures of my children like off the wall, and I'm going to take all the toys and I'm going to put them in a back room. And I'm like, why? Like, they accepted the invitation knowing that you had children. You think that if you eliminate just any imagery that like they're not going to feel bad, like that's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous on its face. So I think, my suggestion to people always is just to be normal, but also to be sensitive, to just take a look around you as you're standing at Kiddush, right? And just, don't go off about like how your back hurts and how oh, like my pregnancy has been so difficult, to the three people around you who don't have children, right? Or just the idea that when, like, maybe if everybody is getting together for a Shabbos meal, or if there's a bris that's coming, like reaching out to a person who you may or may not know that they might be going through something, and just say like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that this is happening, because excluding people because you think maybe they don't want to come is also not a good idea. Um, but also just giving them an out and saying, like, I know it's a difficult time of day. Early in the morning is really hard coming to a bris. Like, it's totally fine. I'm happy to, meet up with you at some other point. Right. Like, I think just kind of being aware of what people potentially might be going through, and taking that extra step, and just thinking about what they might be feeling as they're going through life. And the other thing that I always say to people is to just like check in with people. A simple text of, hey, I just want to let you know I'm thinking about you, is such an easy way to let people know, regardless of what they're struggling with, whether it's in the fertility world or really anything else. It just keeps people knowing that you're on their mind. And like that's the biggest piece that people feel when they're going through something. They feel isolated. They feel like people don't care. They feel like they're never going to be able to be with other people because their lives just look so different. But the reality is that you love them. You just need to connect on a different way. And just a simple text that takes you 10 seconds can mean so much.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I would say that very often people have a tendency to be avoidant and to not want to go there and to worry they're going to say the wrong thing or put their foot in it. But you're right, just being able to reach out. I think we have to really keep it in mind, all of us.
People who know me know that I love babka, and like especially chocolate gooey babka. And the best text anyone ever sent me was, I just want to let you know I'm going to that bakery that you love. How many babkas would you like me to pick up? Like, not like, do you want me to? Or like, maybe it was like, just how many do you want? Right?
Right,
Like,
right.
to show that you're thinking of someone and you know what is meaningful to them. It's so powerful.
Totally right. It's like finding the right way to offer things rather than saying, is there anything that you might want me to make to bring for a meal? Just say, I'm going to bring it to that, just make it easier for people to say yes.
And specific, like the way you said, like, is there anything you want me to bring? Like, it's so hard for people when they're struggling. Like, what do you mean? What do I want? Like, I can't even like, Do you want pizza or Chinese? Which one? So I'm bringing it on Thursday. Decide.
Right. The other related thing I feel strongly about, having spoken to a lot of my single friends, is that sometimes people, when they are in families, feel that a single person wouldn't want to come over, or they, wouldn't be an environment they'd be interested in being in. But just asking, just always including, like, why not? For those people who might be on their own.
Correct. Everyone has the opportunity to say no. No, today is not good for me. But always include people. Always. Because when they're excluded, they just feel like, this is another reason why I don't fit in. This is another way. Like they really don't want me because I'm just at a different stage of life than they are. Like, no, show them that you love them. Put the onus on them. Let them decide if they're up for it or not.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Let me move on to your podcast. You talked about your work really taking advantage of social media. And I think there's an interesting dichotomy here between the support that people want in real life, right? And not losing sight of that and the support that it can give you versus the incredible opportunity of having something at the click of a button right there. And podcast is an amazing medium for that. And you have a very successful podcast of your own, which I'm interested in, being in the podcasting world myself. And it is a niche, right? Like Women's Gallery is also in a niche, I think a very important one. But you have a real niche with your podcast. So I'd like you to explain, what you're trying to do with your podcast. And I wonder, how is it for every episode manage to find new material, new angles on what's quite a specific subject?
I love our podcast. I love podcasting, to be clear. I love it. I love talking with all the different kinds of people. I love hearing people's stories. I love talking to the professionals in the space. So there's something so powerful about sitting with people who have been through the absolute unimaginable and who are in a space who are ready to talk about it. I mean, there's something very different about a podcast space as opposed to, even a singular post on social media, even when people are sharing their story, because you get people in real time. You see the emotion, you see really the essence of the struggle in the way that they talk about it. There's the emotion there. Sometimes people cry, sometimes they laugh, sometimes they do a mixture of both. And many of the people that I interview also are people still very much in the midst of their story, in the midst of their pain. And the fact that they can be so open and so raw about what they're experiencing right now is frankly mind-blowing to me. It's something that I could never have done when I was going through it. And yes, the world was a different place at that point, and we weren't so open about fertility stories, but I find it's remarkable. And I get so much feedback from people listening to those episodes saying, I see myself, I hear myself. And even in the people who have had resolution already, whether it's positive resolution in that they've, had a child, or that they've come to a place where they've said, I can't do this anymore and I need to focus on other pieces of my life. There is that human core of emotion, of people's experience, of the yearning and the way they grapple with things. It's so powerful to hear in real time that I love having these conversations with people. And to your point of how do you keep coming up with new people to talk to? Frankly, I mean, I have a backlog of dozens of people who want to be interviewed. Not that we take everyone, or people that I want to interview. And we don't always do personal stories. Sometimes it's professionals who work in the space as well. But there is an endless amount of stories still out there.
Yeah, I feel the same. There are so many inspiring women out there doing such incredible things that I just want to keep on going and keep on asking people. Is there a particular story or one that stands out? I'd love people to go and listen for themselves, but I wonder if there's anything that's come out of the podcast in particular that has really stayed with you that you could share.
there are really too many, but I think, the ones where I find it especially hard personally to have conversations with people who are single. And the reason why is because when you're married and you're struggling to build a family, you already have a person, and that person is there to support you and to hold you, and you have the same goals and same values, and you struggle together. When someone is single and they are not sure what their future looks like, the reality is that they have what we call and what many people call circumstantial infertility, in that many of those people would never become parents unless they get married. They don't want to adopt by themselves. They don't want to become single mothers by choice. And so there's this like extra angst of people who aren't even at the stage yet where they can even start trying. And so I find it very difficult to try to hold them and hold them in a way that feels safe and warm and comforting. So any of the people that we've interviewed Hani Wasner, who has a big social media personality. She's farmy in the city. We've interviewed a couple of times Sapora Gradko and some others who are on egg freezing journeys. Those stories are the ones that I personally find most difficult.
Do you feel like the egg freezing scenario is almost like a different set of issues, like it needs its own support, or does that come within what you're able to offer?
I think the answer is yes, and in that,
Mm.
yes, we can offer support, and we have a separate support group for people who are egg freezing or considering egg freezing. And we do spend a lot of time both on our resources and on our content on social media talking about singles and those who are considering egg freezing or not. But I think, you know, there is a space within I was supposed to have a baby to hold them, because it's about this unrealized potential. It's about the people who thought their life was going to look different. And they,
They were supposed to have a baby.
exactly. I was supposed to get married. I was supposed to have a baby. I was supposed to have a life that looked very different than this. And absolutely people in that space need other support as well.
Yeah, yeah. There's one other area that I was really curious to ask you about, which is the broader area, to take a step back and to think about the world of women's leadership, particularly in the Orthodox community, but, in a very broad sense. And you're really blazing a trail in a very specific area, but that's very much in support of Jewish women. I wonder whether you have seen changes in this whole area of women's leadership that you've stepped into, obviously from the secular world to the Jewish world in your work, but have you seen that world develop? And how would you advise women who perhaps want to take on a leadership role to get involved, to make a difference? What from your experience can you share?
When I was growing up, I always knew that I wanted to become a doctor, even though at that point, women certainly were going to medical school. I wouldn't say that it was taboo to do so, but I would say it was more unusual. It wasn't necessarily the typical path that people were, forging down. And I got a little bit of pushback in that, especially as I started to become frum, and people would say, like, what man would want a doctor? Like, it's too high powered, and, you're too educated, and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, I married my husband actually always said when he was dating that he wanted to marry a doctor. There's a whole other story, a different podcast. But so, I think that I've never been one to really sort of listen to the naysayers of the world.
Mm-hmm.
For me, because it was deeply important personally to become a physician, so that's what I did. And I think as I've stepped into this, very different path, there were already women who were heads of organizations and running schools and doing so many different pieces in terms of leadership that I had them to look up to, even in the from Jewish space. So I don't necessarily know that I can talk to the change, because from my perspective, when I stepped into this role, I was supposed to have a baby in 2019. There were already so many women who are here. And I always say to people, when you have a dream, there's no reason that your gender should be holding you back. There are so many ways to have a fulfilling life personally, your home life, and also outside the home. And it's really just about trying to balance and trying to maintain your personal standards in terms of what you want to accomplish professionally, in addition to trying to be there for your family and your children, God willing. And thankfully, with the support of my husband, I have been able to manage both.
What really inspires me the most, and what I think you really epitomize, is the way in which you have used your unique talents and your unique path to contribute to the Jewish world. And I hope that will be something that other people listen to and take on board, and thinking about what is it the Jewish world needs and what is it that I can bring. So thank you for sharing your story and your organization. And please God, it will be of help and support to many, many more women going forward. And those who are listening here who may need or want to access or want to explore, then we'll put your details in the show notes of the podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Aimee Baron, for joining me on Women's Gallery.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to this episode and all the others. You can find Jewish learning opportunities for all levels with me, with other educators at lsjs.ac.uk. I wanted to point out two things that are coming up. One is this Sunday, we have AI on trial. We're doing a big mock trial of looking at ChatGPT and other AI and understanding the implications for Jewish learning, Jewish education. It's going to be a lot of fun, as well as really interesting exploring a topic that is impacting all of us. And secondly, we have our Women and Mitzvot course. The second part is starting and you can join in on the 20th of May. I'm going to be teaching alongside two other fabulous teachers. So do look it up, lsjs.ac.uk/WM. And finally, if I could ask you please to take a minute and rate the podcast. It's just a couple of clicks. It really helps others to find it and to help the podcast grow. Thank you so much.